Hey everyone, Wazoo here today, and we are going to be talking about building yourself your own ASP.NET MVC blog application from scratch. That's right, the day has finally come. If you haven't seen any ASP.NET code for a long time or haven't seen it at all, then maybe this is a good video for you to sit down and watch. I think it's going to be really exciting. We're going to go through a lot of the basics of ASP.NET and coincidingly the MVC framework that ships with it, and build ourselves this little blog application that you see in front of you. Yeah, we'll go through a lot of it there. We've got our homepage right now, and this is just sort of a title, and it's meant as a starting point. Usually a blog has some kind of splash landing page where you showcase a lot of the projects you're working on, or maybe some portfolio items. And then we've got links up top here in the navbar. We've got a privacy link, which is auto-generated by the dotnet CLI tool. And then we can click on posts, and we can see a list of the latest posts, where each post will have a title, last updated date, and the actual content of the post. And if we want to, we can click on a title here, and we're brought to a edit screen, and we can choose to update it. And we can then choose a new title, post this thing, and then hit save. And we now see the updated post along with the updated timestamp of the last update to this specific post. And then we can add a new one with a link to a new post where we create a new body. This is the second body. And hit add post, and we're brought back to the post list screen, and we now see the new post in front of us. And if we want to delete one, we can just again go into the specific post we want to delete and hit the delete button. And it is gone. So we are using the SQLite database, which is an easy database, file format database to get started with. It runs on pretty much every platform and doesn't require a whole lot of setup as we might need to do when we're working with MySQL, Postgres, or SQL Server. So yeah, I think this is going to be a pretty exciting adventure today. It may end up being a bit of a long video. I'll put chapters in the video thingy in the timeline down below. I'll have links in the description for places to go for more resources to get started with this, along with a link to where this source code is going to live on my GitHub repository. So sit back, maybe grab your favorite coffee or two, and let's get started. All right. Okay, so here we are on the .netmicrosoft.com page where you can download the CLI, basically the SDK for your particular platform. It's supported on Linux as well as Mac OS. I'm just, of course, recording this on Windows, which is why you see a lot of Windows comments, like mentioning the Windows here. So just download the latest .NET 7 build, and you should be able to install it, keep everything to the default, and you should be good to go. So here we are on the command line. If you open up a terminal shell on your whatever desktop machine you're developing on, and if you just want to make sure and verify that you've got the .NET CLI tool installed properly, you can just type in .NET, and it will then give you a help along with a few extra flags that you can add on the command line. So what we're going to do is first just make sure that we're sort of working with the same version. So if you type in .NET space dash dash list dash SDKs, it will then show you the list of the .NET frameworks that are installed and available on your machine. So by default, the CLI will use the latest version. So in this case, it is 7.0.103. But depending when you watch this, it might be a different number than that. And everything that I'm trying to do in this tutorial everything that I'm doing in this tutorial should be doable with .NET 6 and above. So if you only have the .NET 6 framework, I believe everything I'm doing, the way that we're structuring the code is .NET 6 friendly. But just in case you run into any issues, then just verify that you're at least using .NET 7. Okay, with that out of the way, let's go to wherever you want to do your project work. In my case, I'm just saving it right to my desktop. I know, crazy. So what we're going to do then is use the .NET CLI tool to generate a starter project for us. This is very similar to the idea of a start.spring.io or Rails space new if you've worked with Ruby on Rails. So in this case, we'll be using .NET new, and we can use .NET new -- help again, and it will show us some more help for the flags and that we want to pass into the function, or that we want to pass into the CLI tool. So in our case, we're just going to use .NET new and then MVC because we want to make use of the MVC framework, and then -- name, and we're going to call this one ASP.NET -blog -application, and then hit enter, and it'll do its thing very quickly. And let's go ahead and go into that folder. So ASP.NET blog application, and then we're going to be opening up Visual Studio Code. You can open up a ASP.NET project in either Visual Studio Code or with Visual Studio Community Edition. Anything above probably 2019. I haven't tried a lot of the different versions on my machine. I know it works with the latest 2022 Community Edition. So pick whatever editor you enjoy working with best. And what we're going to be doing is using Visual Studio Code here, as you see. And to help us out, we're going to throw in a couple of extensions. So if you've already got these extensions, then maybe use the chapter markers to skip ahead to where we get started. But for those who need them, let's go into the extension section and let's search for C#. And the first one that comes up is C# by Microsoft, powered by OmniSharp. So we want to install this one, and it'll do its thing. It'll say this extension is enabled globally. Okay, and then you might notice that this pop-up shows up in the bottom right corner saying required assets to build and debug are missing from aspnet blog application. Do you want to add them? Click yes. Trust me, you want to click yes. Okay, so while that's underway, we need another one. We're going to be searching for the NuGet Package Manager extension. So here's one from JMROG. I don't know if that's Jimrog or whatever that developer name is, but this is the package manager extension that I use with Visual Studio Code, and that we'll be using in this tutorial. So install that, and we'll also be making use of SQLite. So if you type in the extensions marketplace SQLite, then the first one that comes up, which is by Alex CVZZ, go ahead and install that one. And that's just it's an explorer for checking out SQLite databases. It's a pretty lightweight explorer thing. So back to our project. The extensions are all in. We've enabled the C# support from Microsoft. So what we have here is a basic application setup thanks to the template, the MVC template that we got from the CLI tool. You'll notice we have a Program.cs file in the root, as well as a csproj file. The csproj file is basically the pom.xml file from a Maven Java Spring Boot project, or the gem file of a Ruby on Rails application. So it's sort of going to be the central place that your IDE will read from, and when we install SQLite later on, it's going to show up, the package itself is going to show up here in this file. So that's the purpose of this one. we have two different appsettings.json files. We'll be touching those briefly in this tutorial, but they're basically very similar to the application.properties configuration file of Java Spring Boot, or the environment initializers of a Ruby on Rails project. Okay, and then over here we have a www root folder, and this just contains any static CSS, JavaScript, and as well as any libraries that are with us in the default template. So you can see right here that we've got Bootstrap and jQuery sort of included by default, which we'll make use of for now, but just know that they're there so that if you want to use a different framework in a different project, then that's where you would need to update these static files. Then we've also got a views folder, which contains all of the markup for the views in our application, as well as a models folder, which right now just contains a single view model. We'll go through some of the different types of models shortly. And then our controllers folder, which will contain controller logic. So to start this up, all we need to do is highlight for the first time, highlight the CSproj file, and then up in the top of your Visual Studio Code, go into the run menu item and click Start Debugging. So it'll do its thing, and it should generate and compile everything for you, and then open up a browser window. Perfect. Okay, so this is our default template generated by the app. We've got a privacy link without any real privacy info, but just a blurb of what you might want to update or get rid of. And then we've got the homepage, of course. We've got a link to the .NET website, and that's pretty much it for getting started with the template. But it's a good starting point because it sets up a navbar along with a homepage and basic layout that you can use in your application. And also notice that by default, because we're using the Bootstrap CSS, we have a responsive website where we can minimize things shrink things down to a mobile view and look at the same web page and navigation menus. So that's pretty cool. That's pretty handy. So we'll keep the server running and we'll check out what's in these views folders. So in the shared folder, we have got a file called layout.cshtml. And this is the general, what I call parent HTML file. So it's going to be the bottommost template that gets rendered on all of our pages. And then this call here to @renderBody, the ASP.NET Engine will then inject whatever specific view that we are on for the app. This will make sense as we get going through the app, but basically any sort of global markup or CSS or even JavaScript, we would put in this layout file, and then any view-specific HTML or CSS would then go into its appropriate views controller name and then CS HTML file. So to demonstrate this, let's go into views/home index.cshtml, and let's just change the welcome text to something like, let's change it to something like blog application. Okay, and then let's go back to our browser, and you'll see that it's not updating. It's not refreshing. So the Visual Studio Code runs it makes use of the .NET CLI tool under the covers to build and run our application with the help of VS Code to do any debugging. So what we can do is use what's called a watch mode, and this is a command on the .NET run CLI which will put your application in a state that if you change any of the files, it'll automatically trigger a rebuild of the application. Let's go into the .vs code launch.json file. And here's some initial configurations that we're getting in here by default. And notice this pre-launch task build. So if we change this to watch instead of build, then when we run it, then when we choose the build run option from the menu, Visual Studio Code will automatically use the watch mode, and it'll update the application as we make updates to the file. So let's go ahead and start it up again. And it should now be starting up in watch mode. Okay, so we've got our blog application title showing up properly here. Let's go back into the view and let's change it to just blog. And then go back. And now see that it's been updated automatically. So this comes in really handy. Now I would say that it is not rock solid in terms of detecting some of the changes to your controllers. So if you're adding new packages, for example, through NuGet, like when we add our SQLite package, I usually just straight up stop and restart the server just to make sure that it is properly flushed and going again. So back on the website here, notice how we've got the home page, and notice how we also have a link to the privacy page, which shows our quote-unquote privacy policy for this website. This matches up with if you look in the views folder, let's just minimize that. If you look in the views home folder, you'll notice that there's an index.cshtml and a privacy.cshtml. So the privacy page has the blurb, use this page to detail your site's privacy policy. So how does ASP.NET choose which one to display? And this is through the help of the home controller. So the home controller has two methods here, one called index and one called privacy. And it returns a view, an instance of a view. And ASP.NET will take this view and it will try to match the name of the function with the view file within the controller you're working on. So we see here that we've got, as I mentioned, an index and privacy. So let's demonstrate this even further. So within the home folder, let's just create a file called garbage. Garbage.cshtml. And then let's put some text in here just called, this is garbage. And then within the home controller.cs, let's add a new method, just public iActionResult garbage. And then we will return, as the other functions, we'll return a view, an instance of a view. So let's go back to the web page and let's type in localhost, whatever the port number is, /home/garbage. And you should now see the new markup. This is garbage. So how is all this happening? So behind the scenes in the Program.cs file, there is a small function down here called map controller route. And so this is the method that ASP.NET is using to match up the controllers with the actions in your application. So for now, if you don't specify anything, so if you just do localhost / then you'll see that we're brought to the home page. And that is because the default controller is the home controller, and the default action in this function is index. So if we're not specifying anything on the URL route pattern, then ASP.NET will interpolate that and fill it in with a default of home index, which will then resolve to the home controller index function, which will return a instance of the view, which ends up being home/index. If you're still a little bit confused about this, don't worry too much. As we get started working on the displaying blog posts, you should be able to figure out how this mapping mechanism is occurring. Okay, so let's delete that garbage.csh file. That was just to highlight the link between controllers and views. Okay, so first things first, let's switch gears a little bit and we'll go into the concept of models. So models in ASP.NET MVC is pretty much the same as models in every other server-side framework language. It is a representation of data that you want to work with within your application. So in our case, let's create a new model file and let's call it PostModel.cs. And let's just make sure we've got the same namespace. In fact, just go into the error view model.cs, cut and paste it right into the PostModel.cs. And let's be sure to change the name to PostModel, and we can empty out the inside. Okay, so what we now have is we want to create an ID field. And .NET, instead of annotations that you might be familiar with in the Java Spring Boot world, in .NET we can use these getter and setter labels, for lack of a better word, and this will tell .NET to automatically generate getter and setter functions for us for this property. So under the covers, ASP.NET will then generate a get ID and a set ID. An incredibly useful tool to have at our disposal here. So let's create an ID and let's create a string for a title, also with getter and setters, and a body, and a date time created at, and a date time updated at, along with appropriate getters and setters. Okay, so this model file will contain the data for each post that we have in our blog application. So let's go ahead and create a... Okay, so now it's time to work with the SQLite database. So in the root of our project, create a folder called data, and then within that folder, create a new file and just call it demo.sqlite. You can call it whatever you want. And because of the extension that we recently added, if you then right-click the SQLite file and then select Open Database, you should automatically see this the database open up in the SQLite Explorer pane in the bottom half of the navigation side. So right now, of course, it's an empty database. We haven't done anything with it. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a table to hold our post data. So let's go ahead and right-click on the demo.sqlite file here, and then let's highlight New Query. And so then we can type in some SQL to create this table for us. So let's type in create table post, and then we've got an ID field, which is an integer, primary key attribute, and we'll use auto increment. And then we'll have a title field with a data type of text, a body field also with data type of text, a created at data type of text, as well as a updated at data type of text, and then close that bracket, and then just right click and run query. And you should see the result of the query on the right. We're not selecting anything, so it's just going to be an empty view here. And if you refresh the SQLite Explorer, you should now see the new tables showing up in the list of the database here. So now if we right click it and then select show table, again, we're not going to see anything because there's no data there, but that's where you'll be able to see any data showing up. Okay, so let's go back to our appsettings.json file. So what we want to do is open up our appsettings.json file. And like I was trying to describe in the beginning, it stores configuration information that is applied to your whole application. So what we want to do here is create a connection string properly to hold the information to our database. So let's create a entry here called connection strings. Connection strings. And then it is a object. And within that, let's give our connection string a name. So I'm calling mine blog data context, but you can give it whatever one you want. And then for a value, we're going to be using data source equals data slash and then the name of the SQLite database. So demo.SQLite. So again, just make sure to replace that name if you didn't name yours demo.SQLite. Let's go back to our router. So in our router, remember how I was mentioning that ASP.NET will automatically generate a path given a controller name and a action name on the URL. So what we want to do is any posts that we want to see or work with, we want to put that into a post controller. So let's go back up to our controllers folder and let's create a new controller and call it PostController.cs. Just to easily copy the namespace, just copy the whole contents of the home.controller.cs file and cut and paste it into the post controller. Get rid of everything under the index and be sure to rename the controller to post controller. Any references to home controller, rename it to post controller. Okay, so we've got our starting controller and we've got a default iAction result index. And so just like the home controller, if we specify in our browser, if we specify /posts, then by default, the index CSHTML will be the one coming up. So let's create a folder under views, calling it posts. And let's create a new one called index.cshtml. And then for now, let's just write in some text. This is our posts. Okay. So now we want to go there. Let's restart. Okay, so what we have here, we have our application again, as we've seen. And so now if we hit /posts, we should be sent to the post/index controller method, which will then pull up the views/posts/index.cshtml file. Okay, so we see this is our post. Things are looking better. I like this. We're on a good path. All right, so now what we need to do is we need to just update our navigation bar to send us to the posts controller. So let's go into the /shared layout. And we've got an existing navbar section here. So all we've got to do really is cut and paste a nav item and fill in posts. So this is a lot of the markup. Some of the HTML markup that we use in ASP.NET, we can use ASP.NET specific properties on those elements. So similar to some JavaScript frameworks where you can use sort of helpers right in the element markup that the framework will recognize, we can do the same thing with the HTML for ASP.NET applications here. So you can see that we've got a normal link here, navlink class, a CSS class of navlink text dark. ASP area, we don't need to worry about that for now, but the ASP controller. So instead of going to the home controller, we want to go to the post controller. And the ASP action that we want to make use of is just the index. And then let's change the name of this link, of course, to be posts. We should now see the posts navbar link show up. And if we hit posts, it'll take us to our post page. And notice the URL changing to /posts. We'll be doing more work with the HTML enhancement for ASP.NET applications as we continue building this app. Okay, so we've got our controller set up. So now we need to actually work with the database and pull back some data. So if we go back to our PostController, what we want to do, what the ultimate goal here is to do, is to pull all of the posts, existing posts, and then pass it back to the view. So what we're going to do is we are going to be creating an instance of a list view model and calling a function that we'll write called GetAllPosts. And then this will return an object that we then return back to the view. So post list view model. So first things first, let's define and create this GetAllPosts function. So what we're going to do is we're going to be using the internal keyword. So this is very similar to a private. And we're going to be returning a PostViewModel and calling the function, of course, GetAllPosts. So all we're going to be doing is opening up a connection to our SQLite database, extracting all the posts, and then returning it within this model that we are going to create. So we're going to start off with a list of our existing post models. So post list equals new. So we're going to create an empty list of those objects. And then what we're going to do is we're going to be calling a using function, and we're going to be creating a SQLite connection equals new SQLite connection. And then we're going to be making use of the application properties connection string that we used here. So before we go any further, we're going to have to do two things. So first of all, in order to make use of that connection string from the configuration, we're going to have to pass a configuration object into the constructor of this PostController. So this is another feature of ASP.NET where it supports a concept of dependency injection, similar to Java Spring Boot, where you can inject or into the constructors of a object that you want to reference or that you want to use for referencing whatever you are injecting into the constructor. Okay, so let's create a new variable in this class, and we'll just call it private read only iConfiguration _configuration. And then within this constructor, right after the logger, we're going to be passing in a iConfiguration object, which we will then store internally so that we can reference it from our functions. So that's one thing done. See how easy that is with dependency injection? With pretty much one liner, we get access to that whole configuration object. Now what we want to do is we want to make use of SQLite functions and methods and objects even. So we're going to have to use the NuGet Package Manager to install the SQLite package into our application. So let's go back to our VS Code browser, and you'll be able to do this through the built-in NuGet Package Manager in Visual Studio. But in Visual Studio Code, since we've added that extension, if you go to the menu Command Palette, and then the first option for me is NuGet Package Manager Add Package. It may not be the first for you, but it should be popping up in this initial list of available commands for you in the palette. So click on Add Package, and then you'll be prompted to add a package name. So search for Microsoft.data.SQLite, and then hit Enter. And then you'll see a list of options here. And all we need is this first one, Microsoft.data.SQLite. So click on that, and then VS Code will show you then a list of all the available versions that you can work with. I'm going to be working with the latest of this time, which is 7.0.3. So click on that, and it will VS Code will automatically pull in the package into our application. And it may prompt you to restore things, so just click Restore. If you then go back to the CS.proj file, you'll then notice a new entry of the Microsoft Data SQLite package in the XML here. So all this is a good sign. So back to our controller. If you notice any variables that are underlined in red, you can use Control period on Windows, or whatever. I'm sure Control period is recognized on the other platforms as well in VS Code, and then just add a quick fix of using Microsoft.SQLite. Okay, so we've got all that added. We've got now a connection to the SQLite database. So let's keep going, and we want to pull in with that connection, we want to create a new command. So another using statement, command equals connection dot create command. And then within that using block, what we're going to do is we're going to open the connection. So connection dot open. And then we're going to specify some SQL. So command dot command text equals. And then what we're going to do is select star from post. Okay, and then we're going to open a third using function, and we're just going to have var reader equals command execute reader. So basically run off and do the query. So if our result, which is our reader, has rows, then we want to stuff each of those rows into a new PostModel object. So while reader.read, let's add a new PostModel item to the post list. So add, and then new PostModel. And let's say reader equals ID equals reader get int 32 of the 0 column, the first column. And then our title matches up with the reader string, get string of the first column, or second column, sorry. Okay, so let's get this out of the way. And then the third is body equals reader dot get string column 2, which is actually column 3. And then we have created at is reader dot get date time 3, and then updated at equals reader get date time 4, which is actually the fifth column because we're going from the 0, we're counting from 0. And then let's end that function there. And let's see, so if there are no rows in the database, then what we want to do is create an else here, and then we want to return a new PostViewModel of post list equals post list. So capital P post list, and this will make sense in a few minutes as we make our PostViewModel. And then after all this data is captured, return a new PostViewModel, and again, post list is equal to our post list of PostModels. That's a lot of posts and models together. Okay, and let's see here. So this matches, I'm not lining up right with the brackets. Okay, there we go. We got to put it one more in here. So let's create our post list model before we go any further so that I can then walk through what it is we're doing. So in our models folder, a good practice is to create a new folder, and we'll call it ViewModels. And then move the error view model, the one that came with the existing template, move that into the ViewModels folder. And then also create a file called PostViewModel.cs. So update the error view model, update the namespace to be ViewModels, and then let's cut and paste the same thing and put it into PostViewModel. And then we're going to call this public class PostViewModel. And then within this PostViewModel, we are going to have a list of all of our blog items. So list of PostModel, post list, and we will then specify the similar get set labels. And then we'll also use this to pass back and forth an individual post model. So when we want to update a post or we want to view a specific post, then we can store the single post model in this view model. Also with getter and setter. So then back in our controller, we should be able to control dot and then just select using ASP.NET models view models. And it should then properly find our post view model. Okay, so we've got SQL stuff, which opens up a connection to the SQLite database. It will then run this query, and then any data that comes back in the result of that query will be stuffing into that list of post model items. So notice that we're creating a new SQLite connection there. And what we want to do is we want to make use of the connection. Remember how we had that connection string property in that app settings configuration file. So let's go ahead and make use of that instance that we stored during the constructor of this controller. And we want to call a method called getConnectionString. And then remember we called ours blog data context. So far, so good. We don't have any data right now, but what we've got so far is, so remember the index method in the controller, it's going to get a list of all the posts, return them into this post list view model, and then shove that post list view model into the view that then gets returned back in the browser. So let's replace this is our post, with something a little more helpful than that. So when we're working with the view, we need to let ASP.NET know what type of model that we're working with. So to do that, we can make use of an annotation model, and we're going to be using the post view model. And so this helps ASP.NET wire up the views with the model that we're expecting to use in this model from the controller. So let's go ahead and create some markup. We're just going to call this one my latest posts. And then what we're going to be doing is let's create a link to create a new post. So let's use a div. We'll give it a class of text_write. And these are Bootstrap specific class names. I can put links to the documentation in the description down below as well. And again, we'll be using an A element, and we're going to be using the AspController property, and we'll be going back to our PostController, and our ASP action will be NewPost. And then let's just call this link NewPost. So you might notice that the model, PostViewModel, is underscored with that red squiggle, which means that it's a good visual indicator that VS Code doesn't know what this is or what to do with it. So there is a ViewImports.cshtml file, and here we've got some annotations here on where we're looking for models that we're referencing in the view. So notice how we have an ASP.NET blog application.models. Now we need to add an entry for using ASP.NET blog application models view models. And then if we go back to our index file, it should resolve itself nicely. It finds it. Awesome. This is going really well. So let's go back to our, is the server started? Okay, so it crashed in the meantime while we did something. So let's hit yes to restart it. Home. Okay, so home controller, I guess we got to add a reference to using ASP.NET blog application models.viewModels in order to find the default error handler. And everything's peachy. So we've got our post link. Let's go back there. Okay, so now we see that we've got my latest posts as a header and a link to the new post that we set up. And if you hover over the NewPost link, you'll see down below that it's being mapped by ASP.NET to /posts/NewPost. Remember how we wanted to map it to that action. So if we click on it now, of course, it won't know what to do with it. It'll say that. So what we're going to do is go back into the controller, and what we're going to do is create a new method here and calling it NewPost. So public iActionResult, and then NewPost, and then all we need to do is return an instance of view. Easy peasy. So back in our folders, our view folders in our project, in the post folder, let's create a NewPost.cshtml. Perfect. So all we need to do here is let's create a header, and let's just call this create a new post. And then what we're going to do is we are going to use ASP.NET to inject a partial. So we're going to use the @annotation html.partial, and then we're going to use the name _insert form. Okay, so what this will do is ASP.NET will then try to look in our same folder and try to find a file with that same name. So what we need to do is in the post folder, let's create a _insert form.cshtml file. Okay, and here's where we have a form for adding a new blog. So again, we need to use a @model to reference a model. And we're going to be using, remember, the PostViewModel. And so remember in the PostViewModel how we have a individual reference to a single PostModel entity. So what I'm going to do is cut and paste the rest of this form, and then we're going to go through it. We're going to go through the elements of it. Okay, so first we have the actual form tag. So we've got a ASP-action attribute here, and we're calling it insert because what we want to do is create or insert a new post object. Then we've got an ID, a form action. We've got a method of post, and we've got a CSS class and a role, which is just bootstrap type of properties. And then we've got a tag here. We've got a grouping for each individual property of the post object that we want to work with. So for this one, we're working with the title. Okay, so we've got a label, an HTML label tag here with an ASP for the post title, then a hidden input for the post ID. So in this case, it's usually going to be null when we're working with a new post that hasn't been inserted into the database yet. And then, of course, we've got the actual input, which is our text input for post title. And then we've got a span here, which contains some message for validation for if we're missing the post title property. Secondly, we've got another row of HTML markup here to contain the post body. So again, we have another label element with the ASP-4 set to be the post.body. And then we've got a text area component that we want to use to contain our post.body content. And I've just specified a rows of 5, calls of 40. Again, those are more bootstrap HTML element properties. And then finally, the one to look at here is our submit button. We've got a input type of submit, and we've got we're naming it add post. When ASP.NET, let's go back to the NewPost.cshtml, and we've got an HTML partial here of insert form. So a common practice in ASP.NET applications is to begin partials with the underscore in the file name. And what that'll do is not only does it tell you is it a visual indicator that it's a partial that we're going to be inserting into another AspNet view page, but it also tells ASP.NET that we want to prevent any navigation to this page directly on the URL. So for example, we cannot, on the URL, we cannot type in /posts/_insert form. It just won't work. ASP.NET won't let us do that. So that's sort of the helper of the partial annotation there. Okay, so we've got a form that we want to work with here using the PostViewModel, which has a single post object that we're referencing throughout this form. Now, when we hit the submit button, it's going to be looking for the insert action of the PostController. Okay, so let's go back to the PostController and let's create a function to handle this insert. Okay, so we're going to create a function called, we'll return an action result, and we'll be using insert, and we'll be taking in a PostModel to this function itself. We'll be passing that in, ASP.NET will pass that object into this function. So what we want to do is take the post, and first we want to set the dates. So set created at to be date, time, now, and the post updated at field to be date, time, now. Then what we want to do is we want to use this similar SQLite setup and command build up. So let's just copy this whole thing. So we've got we're using that same SQLite connection of blog data context. We want to create the command. So instead of select, what we want to do is we want to insert. So insert into the post table, and we want to pass in, or the attributes we want to update are title, body, created at, and updated at. And then we want to use values of post.title, and surrounding them with, because it's a string, we surround it with string quotes. And then similarly, we've got post.body end bracket, and then we've got post.created at, and then post.updated at, and then end squiggly, and all that looks good. So instead of using the reader, because we want to submit this, we're not executing a query, a select query to pull data back. We want to send the query to run. So let's do a try statement, and let's type in command execute non-query. And then we'll catch any exception. Okay, so all of that looks normal, okay. And then what we want to do is, once that completes, what we want to do is we want to return a redirect to action name of index. So what this is going to do is it's going to return us back to, this is going to return us to the index action of the PostController. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this. Okay, so let's select new post, and then let's create a title. This is a new post, and calling it a body. This is a new body, and hit add post. So everything worked okay in the back end. I don't see any errors. We don't see any errors in the markup here. So what we want to do is update the view file to actually list our models. So let's go back into the /posts view /index page, and notice here how we only have the new post section defined. Let's go ahead and add some code to iterate through each post and then display them on our view. So right here, the important section to look at is this for each loop. So we've got an annotation of @for each, and then we're declaring a var p within that model.post list. So within our PostViewModel.post list, which is where we stuffed all of the post models for this view. And then for each of them, all we need to do is display the title. So at p.title, and then I'm displaying the date of the latest updated date, so at p.updated@, and then finally the actual content of the post is at p.body. So notice how we've got a link here set up back to the post controller and an action of ViewPost and a route ID of the ID of the actual post. So what I want to do is when we display our post, let's go back to our view here. What I want to do here is that when we see, or when we click on the link of a new post, or of any post, when we click on the link of any post, then it'll take us to a page where we can edit or delete that post, along with viewing the contents of the post itself. So if we click on the title, we'll get a can't be found because we haven't defined it yet. But notice the URL gets updated to be /post/viewPost and then the ID, which is 1 in the instance of this post. So let's go back into our controller. And what we want to do is create a ViewPost. Okay, so in the post controller, I'm going to put it after this NewPost function here. So let's create a new one called ViewPost. So public iActionResult, and we'll call this ViewPost. And we are taking in that ID of the post that we want to view. So what we want to do is we want to retrieve that post from the database. So GetPostById, and then pass in the ID. And then what we want to do is create an instance of that PostViewModel, and then set the post of that PostViewModel to be equal to the post that we found in the database. And then finally return all that to the view. So return PostViewModel. So right now we're missing the view markup as well as the function to get a post by ID. So let's define that method now, GetPostById. So it's similar to the GetAllPosts, except we want to create a query that'll just extract a post given a specific ID. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut and paste this whole function, PostById, and then we're going to be passing in, remember, the ID of that post that we want to look up. We're going to be returning a PostModel, and so we only need a single instance of it. So PostModel post equals new, and then this same SQLite connection setup and create command, that's all the same. And then here we adjust our SQL to be select star from post where ID is equal to the ID that we pass into this function. And then we can keep the while reader.read, and then what we can do here is post.id is equal to reader get int 32 of 0. We can set the title, post.title equals reader get string column 1. Post.body equals reader get string column 2. Well, actually column 3, but we're 0 based. Post.created@at is reader, and then post.updated@at is get time 4. And then else we just want to return the post. So if there's no post found, then we just want to return the empty post that we created here in the new command. And then after all that, at the very bottom, we just want to return the post. So this will then return the given post back to the into this function, and then we're going to pass it into this PostViewModel, and then again pass it back to the view. So let's make a view called ViewPost. So let's go back to our views, posts, and then let's create a new file and call it ViewPost.cshtml. And remember that we're working with our PostViewModel model. We're binding that to this view. And so what we want to do to display the title, we just use @model.post.title. That's the way to reference the model instance to this view. And then we've got a created @, last modified @, and then we've got the actual body. And then here we've got actions. Here, you know what? Let's just view it first, and then we'll go into the actions later. Okay, so we've got our list. We got our posts. We've got our list of posts. If we click on the title of this one, it should send us to the new view that we just built. And hooray, we do. We get our new object here. And then notice how we've got two links for updating and deleting. So let's go back into our view here. And let's work with the updating first. So we've got an A element, and we've got a ASP controller property set to posts, and then an action set to EditPost, and then a route ID of @model.post.id. So basically, when we click the update link, ASP.NET will build a URL for us that will take us to the PostController, the EditPost, and then it will pass in the ID of the post that we want to edit. So let's go back into the PostController. Let's create a EditPost function now. So public, again, an iAction result, and then EditPost, and then we're accepting an ID as the parameter. And so what we want to do is we want to get PostById. We've already written this function, and then var PostViewModel equals new PostViewModel, and we want to set the post property of that PostViewModel to be equal to the post that we retrieve from the database, and then we want to return the view PostViewModel. So it's a very similar function to ViewPost. In fact, it's pretty much equal, except in our case, we're returning a EditPost view from this. So let's go back to our views, and let's create a EditPost. Where's our view folder here? Let's create a EditPost.cshtml, and similar to our add post, our new post, we're going to be using another partial. So let's just cut and paste this into the edit, and here we'll edit. We'll change the header to edit this post, and then we'll use a HTML partial of update form. So then let's go ahead and create a underscore update form .cshtml, and it's a very similar form to what we put together for the creation, except we've got an ASP action here of update. And let's make this easier. We're using the post method for this form and some CSS classes here. So the properties of this form are pretty much the same as what we went through when creating the insert form. The only thing that's really different is our action. So in the insert form, the action is insert, and so in our update form, the action will be update. So let's go back into our controller, and let's create that update action. After the insert function, let's create a new function, and we'll call it update, and we're taking in a PostModel. So what we want to do is first set the updated at field to be date time now again, and then we want to set up the same SQLite, which we've got right here. So we're creating a instance to the SQLite database, and then we're creating another command, and now our SQL becomes update post. We want to update the post table. We want to set the title to be the new title of what we've come up with. We want to set the body to be the new body that we've edited, and we want to set the updated at field to be the new updated at field that we've set, where ID is equal to the given post ID. So we're going to execute all that, and then we're going to return back to the index action of this controller. Click on a post. Okay, so we want to update it, and let's edit it. This is a new post, and this is a new body, and then hit update post. And we should see the new post, updated body, and notice how the timestamp has also been updated. Perfect. So we're almost done. So all we have to take care of now is the delete command. So delete works a little bit differently in forms because there's no actual delete method that we can specify on a link element. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to make use of some JavaScript. So back in our ViewPost.cshtml, remember how we have this link or input type submit down here, and we've got a onClick function here set to delete post, and then we're passing in the ID of the post that we wanted to delete. So what we're going to do here is this onClick, of course, is some JavaScript. So we're going to create a JavaScript method called DeletePost, which will take in the given post ID, and then with some AJAX, send a delete request to the server to make sure that this post is deleted. So in our www-root folder, there's a JS folder and then a sites.js file. So go ahead and open that up. And what we want to do here is create a delete post function, and we'll just call it I. And then what we want to do is make a $, because we can use jQuery. So jQuery AJAX. And then the URL is going to be /posts/delete. And then our type of request is going to be a post. And the data that we're going to send in that request is the ID. So ID of I, which is what we're passing into the JavaScript. And then since the AJAX method returns a promise, what we're going to do is then with that promise, we are going to set the window location to be just /posts. And that's it. So when this command completes, or when this request AJAX call completes, then we're going to just go back to the post listing and it'll then, of course, make a fresh request to the database to retrieve the blog posts. And since this one that we deleted is no longer there, then it will not be returned in that result set. So back in our PostController, we have to make one final method to handle that delete call. We're going to be using some ASP.NET specific annotations here, and just called HTTP post. So we're sending a post request to this function, and we're going to be returning a JSON result instead of an action result. We're going to be returning a JSON result and calling it delete, of course. And what we're going to do is, with that same SQLite setup .command text, we want to delete from the post table where ID equals the given ID that we pass into this. And then we want to execute this query. And then all we want to do when this stuff finishes is return a JSON of just basically an empty JSON object. So one thing I didn't mention until now is that notice that we are not doing any kind of cleanup at all in our database connections. And it's because when you use the using style of working with connections and commands, then ASP.NET will automatically clean all this up for us as we progress through our application. So we don't have to worry about any of that. Okay, so we've got this all set up. We're returning some JSON of a new object, and we're handling a post request with this information passed into this function, this delete function. So let's go ahead and rerun it, and let's go list our post. And so we've got this is a new post. So if we now hit the delete button, it should delete and then take us back to the list of all the posts. So let's delete, and we see that it's now been deleted. And let's create a new post. This is post 3, and add the post. Hooray! All right, that's excellent. We were able to go through the process of creating your own blog application using ASP.NET. Now, as you can tell through the code that we've put together here, there's a room here to explore and clean up a lot of this code. Notice that a lot of our database calls to the SQLite database are all very similar, and they should be moved into something other than the controller. So the ASP.NET version of some of that middleware is called repositories, which is similar to the repositories idea of a Java Spring Boot application, but without the sort of handy annotation that you get in Java Spring Boot. But I didn't go into that here. I just wanted to demonstrate how easy it was to set up SQLite and do calls back and forth. So we also have other enhancements that we can put into this blog application, such as handling authentication and authorization, so that you can track users for each blog post, or authors, I should say, and then you could log in and out of the system with your different author username and password. So that's another enhancement that we can do here that I can think of right off the bat, but I'm sure there's more. If there's anything that you want to see in a part 2 of this video, then just leave a comment down below. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed what we went through today. Give the video a like, subscribe to the channel for new updates, and I'll see you in the next one, folks. Peace.